Coming up on Arirang News, South Korea and the U.S. agree to work together to strengthen the global supply chain in high-tech products like semiconductors, encouraging more efforts like the recent U.S. investments announced by South Korean companies. Global credit ratings agency Fitch decides to keep South Korea's rating at AA-, its fourth highest level, citing the country's strong finances and economy. And South Korea reports its highest number of new coronavirus cases yet. For the first time, there were more than 1,800 in a single day, which means the current distancing rules will likely stay in place. It's 5:00 p.m. here in Seoul. Thank you for joining us on Arirang News. I'm Devin Whiting. South Korea and the U.S. have agreed to work together to address the issue of weak supply chains in the high-tech sector. That issue has come to the fore in the pandemic, especially in semiconductors and batteries for electric vehicles. Kim Ji-yeon reports.
Senior officials of South Korea and the U.S. have said bilateral cooperation is critical in addressing the issue of weak supply chains for key technology products such as semiconductors and batteries for electric vehicles. Acting U.S. Undersecretary of State for Economic Growth, Energy and the Environment, Maria Bernicat, said in an economic forum hosted by the Washington-based Atlantic Council think tank on Wednesday that the two countries are working together to build resilient, diverse, and secure supply chains for critical technologies. She added that bilateral cooperation creates opportunities to enhance competitiveness, improve the already robust relationship between the two countries, and create jobs of the future for their citizens. Bernicat said the two countries' cooperation should also be expanded into the fields of quantum computing, climate change countermeasures, and global vaccine supply. The U.S. diplomat welcomed the $39 billion of investment pledges made by Korean companies at the sidelines of the summit between President Moon Jae-in and President Joe Biden in Washington in May. In a keynote speech at the forum, South Korea's second Vice Foreign Minister Choi Jong-moon said the investment plans revealed at the summit are a symbolic move and that they can materialize only when the two countries' governments are prepared to help with proper policy tools. He noted the U.S.'s $52 billion program to support semiconductor manufacturing and hoped Korean EV battery manufacturers can be supported by the program to contribute to the supply network in the U.S. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
South Korean Finance Minister Hong Nam-gi has announced financial support and tax breaks for companies working in 65 different kinds of technology related to semiconductors, batteries, and vaccines. He said that the government will support these companies with more than 2 trillion Korean won, or about $1.7 billion. Minister Hong also said that the government will help coal-fired power plants and car factories become more eco-friendly. As part of that plan, the government will build power plants that burn liquefied natural gas to replace the coal plants and help pay for renovations at car factories. Fitch Ratings has decided to keep South Korea's credit rating at AA-, the agency's fourth highest level. The rating has remained the same since September 2012. In a report on Thursday, Fitch said South Korea's outlook is stable, citing what it says are its robust finances and a steady economic performance. It also said the government has been handling the pandemic well and that rising exports have helped the recovery. It projected GDP growth for this year to be 4.5% and 3% in 2022. With asset prices soaring, including real estate and stocks, the average South Korean household saw its assets rise to more than $400,000 last year. And the combined value of all real estate in the country was the highest on record. Pae-yeon-ji reports.
South Korean households' net assets last year were up by more than 10% from the year before. This is according to the preliminary national balance sheets for 2020 released by the Bank of Korea on Thursday. As of late last year, Korean households had an average of around $445,000 of assets. This is 10.6% higher than the figure in 2019, when it recorded $403,000. And this is also similar to the figures recorded in 2019 in France and Japan, suggesting that South Korea's economy has grown to the level of developed countries. The central bank said the rise was led by a sharp increase in house prices and stock prices last year. In fact, the combined value of all real estate in the country reached its highest level on record. Due to higher land and building prices, it amounted to 5 times the country's GDP. Most of the Korean households' assets was real estate, accounting for nearly 75% of total assets. This is a 1.1% rise from the year before. National wealth as a whole amounted to over $17.7 trillion last year, up 6.6% from the previous year. That's more than 9 times the nation's GDP. 배은지, Arirang News.
One of Korea's national treasures is being turned into a non-fungible token, or NFT, a type of digital asset that's become hugely popular alongside cryptocurrencies. The Kansong Art and Culture Foundation says it's planning to make an NFT out of the Hunmin Jeongeum, the 15th century manuscript considered as marking the invention of the Korean alphabet, Hangeul. NFTs are uniquely identifiable digital documents, often images that can be traded on the blockchain. Each NFT version of the Hunmin Jeongeum will have a unique serial number. There will only be 100 of them, and each one will be priced at 100 million won, or about $87,000. The Kansong Art and Culture Foundation said it's launching the NFTs to address its financial difficulties as a new form of sponsorship. It's a controversial idea. The Cultural Heritage Administration, which is in charge of Korea's national treasures, said it'll look into whether treasures can be used in this way, even if they do belong to a private foundation, and what the potential effects might be. The Olympics are underway now in Japan. Big companies around the world have for decades seen this as a great marketing opportunity, some spending hundreds of millions of dollars to become an official Olympic sponsor. But this year, some companies are distancing themselves from the Games because of the controversial way they're being held in the pandemic. Others are looking at new ways to promote their products rather than direct sponsorship. Kim Sung-min reports.
It is against basic ethics to hold such an event when the world is suffering so much. I think it's wrong to hold the Olympics during this period.
This is still a general sentiment in Japan about the upcoming Olympics, with some polls showing around 70% of the total population wanting them to be cancelled. Such opposition has put sponsors in a difficult spot with how they're going to position themselves at a pandemic-tainted games.
There is a mixed public sentiment towards the games at this moment, or even past year towards the games. So in that respect, there must be a decision by each company in terms of how they should be able to disseminate, how they should be able to convey their messages.
Many have chosen to distance themselves. That includes Toyota, a leading worldwide sponsor, which has decided not to air any Olympics-related TV commercials in Japan, and its president will not be attending the opening ceremony. The same decision was made by the country's 3 biggest business associations, choosing not to send their leaders to Friday's opening ceremony. Airbnb, also a worldwide sponsor of the Olympics, made it clear during an interview with U.S. news outlet Axios that the partnership was designed specifically to support the individual Olympic and Paralympic athletes and not any particular city or games. However, some are taking a different path, swiftly adjusting their marketing strategies instead of completely pulling out. Samsung Electronics, the only Korean company among the top 15 sponsors of the Games, has come up with a virtual media center where people can get a sneak peek of their Galaxy products safely at home. Another way Samsung expanded its marketing was to form Team Galaxy, made up of 11 South Korean athletes, with some wearing the new Galaxy Watch 4. The top sponsors of the Olympics have reportedly paid around $500 million for multi-year rights for marketing and exclusive deals with the International Olympic Committee. And about half of the total budget for the Tokyo's Olympic and Paralympic Games, which is around $3 billion, came from the local sponsorships. Kim Sung-min, Arirang News.
Time now for an in-depth look at the market news this afternoon, and for that I'm joined on the line by Dr. Kim Se-won, professor of economics at Ewha Women's University. Professor Kim, good afternoon. Thanks for coming on today.
Good afternoon, Devin.
Well, stocks in New York were up overnight as earnings continued to come out better than expected. The Dow, which saw a big drop earlier this week, has recovered all of that, and the S&P too. What's the story in the global markets?
Recently, U.S. markets have been going through adjustment over concerns on higher inflation and economic recovery. But yesterday, U.S. investors recovered confidence on economic expansion due to improved performances in major corporations like Johnson & Johnson and Coca-Cola. Also, investors believe that current spread of COVID variants are not as serious as the outbreak of COVID-19 in early 2020. Yesterday, Dow Jones had a 0.8% return and Nasdaq had a 0.9% return, respectively. Also, by reflecting stronger economic recovery, U.S. 10-year Treasury bond yield increased up to 0.3% level from previous 1.2% level. European markets also increased in a large scale yesterday, thanks to signs of economic recovery in Euro region. London, Paris, and Frankfurt gained by 1.7%, 1.9%, and 1.4%, respectively.
And here in Korea, stocks closed higher for the first time in 5 sessions, up close to 1% on both main indices. It seems in part because of the rise in U.S. stocks. Tell us about the domestic market.
Korean stock retreated for a 4th consecutive session until Wednesday as the resurgence of the new coronavirus weakened investor sentiment for risks. But domestic market recovered today as hopes of economic recovery get stronger in advanced countries. And yesterday's U.S. market rebound also gave a positive impact today. Kospi gained by about 1.1%, and Kosdaq also gained by 0.8% today. Today's market rise was led by institutional investors and foreign investors. In Kospi market, foreigners and institutions both net 61 billion won and 820 billion won respectively, while individual investors offloaded a net of 882 billion won.
And switching gears here, Professor, the International Monetary Fund is now calling for global GDP growth this year of 6%, which is the same as its forecast back in April. But there are, as might be expected, big differences in how fast various individual economies will grow. The actual IMF report is due out next week, but what is the IMF saying?
In previous global economic growth forecast in April, IMF has expected that global economy will grow by 6% for this year. IMF chairman Georgieva said that IMF still maintains 6% global economic growth forecast for this year, even with widespread of COVID variants in yesterday's speech. But she also said that the shape of global economic recovery has been changed, which means there will be a wider gap in economic growth between vaccinated countries and not vaccinated countries. She expects the speed of economic recovery depends on the speed of vaccination, which is basically determined by financial resources of each government. And this will be a fundamental threat to underdeveloped countries' economic recovery. For reference, IMF previously forecasted Korean economy will grow by 3.6%, which is the highest economic growth forecast among domestic and foreign economic institutions.
Right. Well, staying on that theme, Korea does continue to post strong exports despite the Delta variant hitting economies around the world. Still, some are saying that if the virus hits production by Korean companies, that would in turn have an impact on exports. What can you say about the threat of the Delta variant?
Korea's exports soared to a record high level in the first half of July, even with globally widespreading Delta COVID variant. This stronger export is powered by strong sales of semiconductors, petrochemical products, and automobiles. Monthly exports have now increased for 8 months in a row. According to Korea Customs Service, early July's export surged 33% on year to $15.1 billion US. Major export items led strong growth, and the automobile exports, for example, increased by 28%, and semiconductor exports also increased by 34% on yearly basis. However, if COVID variant spread continues in our major export partners, Korean export can be seriously affected around the end of this year.
Well, now staying domestically here, Finance Minister Hong Nam-gi is saying that home prices in Seoul may have peaked, and he's among those warning that prices could in fact start to fall. There are some signs of demand starting to soften. What do you see happening with home prices in Seoul, and what might the impact be on the economy of this overheated market?
Even with lots of countermeasures, domestic real estate market is far from stabilization. Both of apartment price and apartment rents are heating up without stop for years. Real estate market is very important in every country, but it is particularly more important in Korea because 80% of wealth is focused on housing wealth. Therefore, if we have a shock in housing market, like a sudden drop in housing price, the shock really shakes fundamentals of Korean economy right away. So under current situations in real estate market, government believes that housing market bubble should be controlled in a certain way. Otherwise, if housing price drops in next 2 to 3 years, household that burden trigger another economic downturn. So government sends warnings that housing market is around its peak and be cautious on purchasing house now.
Well, that certainly could be advice to be heeded in this market. Professor, thank you so much for sharing your insights with us today, as always. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
South Korea today reported yet another all-time high number of new coronavirus infections, topping 1,800 for the first time. This includes close to 300 cases from a South Korean Navy ship. It's looking very likely that the current level of distancing in the capital area will be extended. Choi Min-jung reports.
South Korea on Thursday reported 1,842 new COVID-19 cases. That's the highest number since the pandemic began, topping the previous record set the day before. Thursday's total includes 270 infections from the recent outbreak at the Navy's Hangeul unit, which was operating in waters off the coast of Africa. With one more member confirmed positive on Thursday morning, over 90% of the crew has been infected. However, even without the addition of the Hangeul unit's cases, there are no signs of the spread slowing down in the country. South Korea's daily tally has been hovering above the 1,000 mark for well over 2 weeks. Over the past 7 days, there were more than 1,400 locally transmitted cases a day on average. Concerns are also growing over increasing numbers of cases in regions outside the Greater Seoul area. These regions outside the capital area have seen more than 500 cases for 2 days in a row. Health experts say the uptick is mainly due to the spread of the highly transmissible Delta variant and more people traveling across the nation. Given the current circumstances, pundits say it's highly likely that the current level 4 social distancing measures in the Greater Seoul area will be extended for another 2 weeks. The decision on whether to change or extend the current measures will be made at the weekend, as it is due to end on Sunday. Health authorities say further discussions are needed with local governments on whether regions outside the capital area will have to increase their social distancing measures. Choi Min-jung, Arirang News.
And the South Korean health authorities today cited a study in Canada finding that one dose of the Moderna vaccine is 72% effective in preventing infection with the Delta variant and 96% effective in preventing hospitalization and death. Today, South Korea's vaccination task force cited that study in Canada on 420,000 people. In Korea, people in their 50s are scheduled to get the Moderna vaccine starting next Monday. As of today, 77.6% of the people who are eligible have made their reservations. President Moon Jae-in met today at the Blue House with Washington's #2 diplomat to discuss issues related to the Korean Peninsula and their bilateral alliance. President Moon called for efforts to resume dialogue with North Korea, and the U.S. official expressed hope that the regime will respond to those efforts soon. Kim Min-ji reports.
President Moon Jae-in has asked U.S. Deputy Secretary of State Wendy Sherman to make efforts for the resumption of talks with North Korea. Sherman is in South Korea on an extended visit to Asia and paid a courtesy call on Moon at the Blue House on Thursday. Moon said he has high expectations for the U.S. diplomat, calling her a veteran who is familiar with the situation on the Korean Peninsula and in Northeast Asia. The South Korean leader recalled his summit with U.S. President Joe Biden in May, where they reaffirmed the need for dialogue and diplomacy for complete denuclearization and lasting peace on the peninsula. Sherman said that the U.S. hopes for an early response from Pyongyang to its proposal for talks, and she called for continued efforts with Seoul to coordinate on North Korea policy. She added that she plans to discuss the matter in depth with Chinese officials during her visit to Beijing later in the week. Earlier in the day, Sherman met with South Korea's Foreign Minister Chung Eui-yong, where they vowed close coordination across all levels to bring North Korea back to the negotiating table. Sherman was quoted as saying that the U.S. places high importance on the alliance as a linchpin of peace, stability, and prosperity in Northeast Asia and the Indo-Pacific. Chung called for close communication to implement follow-up measures to the outcomes of the South Korea-U.S. summit. On Friday, the U.S. diplomat will hold a bilateral strategic dialogue with her South Korean counterpart Choi Jong-gun before heading to Mongolia. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
President Moon has designated special disaster zones in some parts of Jeollanam-do province, which have seen flooding this summer. These areas in the southwest of the country are in the counties of Changheung, Gangjin, and Haenam, as well as 4 villages in Jindo County. The Blue House spokesperson said that President Moon asked for special attention to be given to these areas to help residents affected by the flooding. These areas will get financial support from the government for recovery work, as well as relief funds for the victims and a reduction of their utility bills. The Korean Cultural Center in France has been hosting a contest for fans of Korean films and dramas. It's a parody contest in which fans are invited to reenact their favorite scenes. Shin Ye-eun reports.
Watching Korean movies and learning Korean by themselves paid off for Manis and Selena earlier this month when the 2 best friends came in first place at a K-movie and drama parody contest. They reenacted the gang fight scene from their favorite Korean movie, Sunny.
어이, 그 뒤에 아이는 뭐냐? 축소 맞추려고 중학생 때에 왔냐? 얘랑 눈만 치지 마라. 귀신 는다.
Under the team name Uri Groove, the 2 memorized more than 50 lines in Korean. For days, they rewatched the movie to master their pronunciation. Though proud of their work, they never imagined coming in first place.
We scream, we jump, we dance and cry a little bit. We didn't expect it at all. We were proud of our videos, but then we saw that there was a lot of great videos too.
The parody contest was hosted by the Korean Cultural Center in France. It was the first time a contest of this kind has ever been held in Europe. A total of 86 teams participated, posting self-made films on YouTube. Most parody dramas, like Guardian, the Lonely and Great God, and the Oscar-winning movie, Parasite.
France is a booming place for Hallyu, the Korean wave. Now this pop culture is gaining more and more fans in France. So this is the reason why we organize this parody concert in order to meet the growing demand.
We really want to see the Korean culture develop globally. we try to share it with our peers and our family. K content is really entertaining, colorful, like I said, and funny a lot. So I think that people can dream about everything they want with K-pop, K-drama, movie, and etc.
The Korean Cultural Center in France is preparing to hold the second edition of the Parody Contest next year. 신예은, Arirang News.
And that brings us to the end of this newscast. Thank you for watching. More live news coming your way at 7 p.m. Korea time.